All right, George. Just before we start, going through the presentation and start sharing the presentation, can you just say a few lines about Daniel, who is in uh, his background?
Yes, of course. Mr. Gagnon is an organizational agility advisor who co-founded the Agile Leader Academy, a boutique training, coaching, and consulting firm to help leaders develop progressive team building skills in dynamic and adaptive work environments. Agile Leader Academy works across a range of industries, including finance, energy, manufacturing, legal, and pharmaceutical. They have trained 2,000 plus people and held 50 plus events, and Mr. Gagnon has personally spoken at numerous events in many countries. Daniel's message is always well received as it is one of realistic hope, how leaders can build better workplaces where fear and misery are banished and true agency can be fostered, and how to avoid the pitfalls of fake agility in leadership. For more information, you can find Mr. Gagnon at LinkedIn. Today, we will speak about a new topic of his, which is the transition from a classic PMO to a VMO, Value Management Office. One moment, I will share now the presentation.
All right, just Daniel, just before we say something for you, let's make you have the time before we share the presentation for you to share some words about what we're going to do today. What is this workshop about, and some words about the scope of this presentation.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you, Achilles and George. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here, although you can't see me, some technical difficulties, but we're going to overcome that. So this is a very recent presentation, and it is also a subject which is quite a new subject, as we'll see in the body of the presentation. This is an evolution towards moving away from individual initiatives, individual projects, and moving more towards benefits realization and value capture at the level of the entire organization. So it is a fundamental shift in mindset as opposed to being simply a name change. And that is very important to understand. The scope of today, we're going to explain basically the difference between the XMOs. You'll see what I mean by XMOs in a moment, and share some very preliminary ideas around how to make this happen in concrete terms. I'm also going to be sharing something that we at Agile Leader Academy design we call it the Transformation Alignment Canvas, or the Journey Alignment Canvas. So that is a very important tool that visually helps understand what we're talking about here when we talk about moving towards a VMO, moving towards capturing benefits, and moving towards capturing value, as opposed to simply running initiatives pell-mell. So are you going to share the presentation? I guess we could start.
Yeah, we're okay. Can you see the slides, Daniel?
I cannot see them. No.
All right. So, all right. Sorry for that. So at the moment we see the slides, and George is showing, moving from the first slide to the second. So I think that
Okay.
everybody can see the slides, I guess, except from you. So it's quite like a test for how good you know your presentation, right?
Yeah, no problem.
Slide two.
Bring
All
it
right.
on. Bring it on. The show must go on.
Yeah.
Okay,
All
no
right.
problem. Okay, so let's move beyond the title slide. So the first slide, the clarification around many types of PMO. So back in March 2023, the PMI actually came out with this report called The Evolution of PMOs, Delivering Value Through XMOs. But what they were talking about is basically, yes, this idea of moving towards a VMO, but it was a very interesting study because as you see in these percentages here, not every organization necessarily has only a PMO. We see 65% do, but there are other XMOs. There's program and portfolio management offices, enterprise project management offices, project support, etc., as you can see. the percentages, the math doesn't add up. It adds up to way more than 100, obviously. The reason being, as you can well suspect, that many organizations, larger ones especially, will have many types of these offices in place. What we notably don't see here is VMOs. There are very few organizations that have actually gotten to the point where they have implemented VMOs. So this is a new trend. It began, the first academic references to it began in 2015, started picking up a little bit more mind share around 2019. And then, PwC and a few other consultancies started talking about maybe in 2021. So this is very new. Which is why if you search, you're not going to find much yet. So we're cutting edge here, not bleeding edge, but cutting edge. Moving on to the next slide. So PMOs are under pressure, and you folks who are, I suspect many of you are in the project management profession, program management profession, portfolio. You've probably been experiencing this for a while, right? And worldwide, and especially with clients that I work with and trainings that I give, I've been privy and I have seen this pressure on project managers and project management professionals. I've seen it up close, and it is uncomfortable, right? There's a sense of change, and along with agile transformations, digital transformations, COVID, the return to work, these tectonic shifts, these multiple crises at once, have project management professionals running for their careers. So moving on to the next slide. So let's take a step back and look at some designs that we were used to before. So the first familiar organizational type of design that we're very familiar with, a PMO that implements a strategy, but that strategy, that prioritization of the portfolio, that decision of where to spend money on what's the vision, that is out of the hands of the PMO most of the time. Some upper management echelon, C-suite or a steering committee at a corporate level of some kind, makes these prioritization decisions, and it is shoveled down to the PMO with the order, execute on this, right? So no connection there between execution and strategy. The PMO is an order taker. This is one design that is an older design, has been around for a long time, and as we shall see, this is something we're questioning. Another design you'll be very familiar with if you've worked in large organizations, multiple PMOs. So I've worked in organizations where every single line of business had its own project management office, but still each of these PMOs was still subservient to the overall upper management echelon, which again, all the decisions, arguing, the negotiation took place up top, and then these multiple PMOs were simply given, okay, LOB number one, line of business number one, here's what you need to execute on this year. Number two, this is what you need to execute on this year. And basically these PMOs also competed for scarce resources, obviously. Another familiar design in large organizations, now it gets really complicated because we have business PMOs, which are applying a project management lifecycle, but you also have IT delivery management organizations that sort of shadow the PMO and bring in, basically a software development lifecycle, governance sort of on top of that, and all of these folks are still executing on a corporate plan that was elaborated above their heads. This gets very complicated, and I've actually managed portfolios at both the business and the IT governance level. Very complicated. It is sometimes almost war. So these approaches were built for very different times, and even then, as we saw, they were sort of disconnected. Next slide again, after the little horse, we go to the race car here. So we see obviously that these top-heavy structures where there's a disconnect between strategy and execution are not meant to keep up with today's speed of change. And next slide, never mind tomorrow's speed of change. in the poly crisis we're both seeing now. So we need to think differently, and organizations need to think differently, and we have to resolve this disconnect between upper management and delivery organizations such as PMOs, XMOs. So next slide. How do we start evolving from a PMO to a VMO? So the first step in the right direction is to take an existing PO and give it basically an upgrade. We're going to see that it's far more than changing the carpet in the PMO war room. It is also not just a name change, right? So, but that's one good place to start. If you already have an existing PMO or an enterprise PMO, start to think of it as a value management office. This is the approach that I've taken over the years with the EPMOs and PMOs I've worked with. Start thinking in terms of value, not just initiative delivery. Because the VMO, basically, on the next slide, is a bridge between the slabs, and that's the hierarchical levels between the C-suite and the people executing the work, but also bridges across vertically across the functional silos. We saw in the earlier model where you have line of business silos. You could even have divisional silos within a line of business. So we have to start bridging these gaps. On the next slide. So what does a VMO look like? Who is in a VMO? We're going to delve into that now a bit. Basically, it should gather everyone that we need to work together in order to create a flow of value more quickly to the end customer. So executive team members, all the governance stakeholders besides the PMO, risk, compliance, security, data, enterprise architecture. We need to bring these people, these stakeholders into the conversation at the value level much earlier. And we bring these into a single entity. Next slide. That entity, the VMO, is where the analysis, the selection, the prioritization. So the work of the entire enterprise is really brought together, and the decisions are no longer the of simply the C-suite, but the C-suite has to collaborate with these other stakeholders and parts of the organization and get these cycles going. So next slide. I mentioned earlier in the beginning, I was talking about something called the Transformation Alignment Canvas that my business partner and Agile Leader Academy and I put together. Very simple canvas. Let's take a look at it. Next slide. So it is a canvas that it simply looks at scale and impact. And this is where we can see also, I'll explain it now because I'm going to load it up with more information. So benefits rise as you move across from the lower left-hand corner to the upper right-hand corner of this canvas. Now, we've drawn a straight line for simplicity, but the truth is it would probably look more like an exponential line. So on the horizontal axis, we have, on the vertical axis, or on the left-hand side of the screen, we have impact, right? So, and on the horizontal, we have scale. So for an example, a local one function ways of working change will have low impact and is low in scale. So as you move out, if you look at the scale one, project to multidisciplinary teams, to value streams to the enterprise, that's scale. And ways of working, just not one team, but when you attack your governance management processes with all stakeholders involved, and eventually get to issues around leadership, around vision, around culture, and combine that at scale, that's where the most benefits will derive. So let's look at a concrete example. And these are just on the next couple of clicks. Achilles or George, I don't know who's, it's just you see little blue words appearing. These are the benefits along the arrow. So in a low impact, low scale, you get some more engagement from the team. On the next click, you'll see delivery acceleration. That's when you're at a project level and you're working on your governance. And adaptability when you get more towards the value stream. And the final click of these blue little titles here is at the upper right-hand corner. When you are working on culture, leadership, and vision at an enterprise scale, that is when you achieve the ability to anticipate market forces and to innovate. You do not get the ability to innovate before being an enterprise scale and working at a cultural level. You simply do not, because your people do not have enough skin in the game. There is not enough deep engagement, and there is not enough time, basically. So moving to the next slide just clears all this up to make way for an illustration and example. So if we go to the next slide again, you should see a little pink box appear. An example of a low impact change, basically. An agile transformation office wants IT-centric agile teams and a little bit of agile project management. We see this all the time. This is so-called agile transformations. Well, agile transformations that remain in the IT sphere and don't engage past a little bit of agile project management remain low impact and at small scale. Now, if we contrast this on the next click, we'll get a green box on the right-hand side. Maybe we have an Agile Center of Excellence in that same organization, and what they had in mind was going further, looking into servant leadership, product-based tribes, customized Agile delivery methods rather than just Scrum with one team, etc. So we have a disconnect here, because the Agile Center of Excellence might be, and I've experienced this. This is actually a true story. This was in a large organization where I was the head of practice for the Agile Center of Excellence, which was more a business governance and overseen by some members of the executive board. We had a very ambitious plan, but IT was very focused on simply focusing on their teams. So what we were trying to achieve in the green space was bigger scale, more impact, but we were limited because there was an actual also agile transformation in IT, and there was a clash. And there's no space where these two intersect. All right, so next slide just clears that again, because we're moving on to a different model now. We're going to see what basically the next slide just clears everything again. So we have a really nice white slab, white canvas now. So in keeping with how do you move from a PMO to a VMO, let's look at the landscape in terms of impact and scale. Obviously, the executive committee is going to be in their ability to have impact at scale way up in the right-hand corner, right? Because as we've seen, they're currently determining a strategic orientation, setting the yearly budget, et cetera, and giving it down to the PMO to implement. At the lower impact level, we have the execution by product and project teams left to themselves. They do not have the authority to have that much impact because they will eventually hit an impasse with the other stakeholders. Next click brings us with our compliance and regulatory and governance, depending on the industry, functions within the organization, which have probably less impact on their own than the executive committee, but are definitely at high scale, at large scale. The next click brings us to, I've seen this also, there's also a transformation office doing a digital transformation, or maybe some agile change management, in addition to everything else going on. And in the middle of this, with the next click, we have the poor PMO trying to basically make sense of these multiple stakeholders. So I'm going to clear this away again and look at everything we've seen, how this would look like, what this would look like. So I said in an earlier slide, start by upgrading an existing PMO. So the existing PMO usually will sit squarely in the middle in terms of their impact and scale. The idea that we want to have everyone work towards is to extend that impact and scale. So the next click will make the box bigger. And the next click, you will see that we're just going to add in and rename this, rebrand this, and repurpose this and change the vision to the VMO, which is the single entity for strategy, all the things we've seen, prioritization, adaptive governance, execution. And within that VMO, we can bring back our other players now. With one click, we bring in executive participation. The next click brings us the people from the transformation office. Next click, compliance. And the next click, the product and project teams in a single entity, and we're going to see it should not be a centralized bureaucracy. So this has more impact, is at a higher scale than everyone working completely on their own with a poor PMO stuck in the middle. Now, you won't be able to do it exactly this way. This is a perfect illustration. So what usually happens, what I've seen happen in the occasions I've been involved with, the next click is just a silent click. So the next one brings you, so this is a seductive diagram, little text there. Yes, it is a seductive diagram, but it's a bit wrong as well. What will really happen, on the next click, the animation will resume. Basically, everyone will have 1 foot in the VMO, but also 1 foot out of it because they have their ordinary areas of concern to attend to. The executive committee, the executives still have work to do that is not necessarily within the purview of the VMO. Same thing with everyone else. You know, the product teams, the project teams have to work on their projects. The transformation office and compliance people have other work to do. But if we click again, basically, and we see that reality will look more like this, even in success. Thing is, 1 click will clear that away. Next click. The VMO is a cross-functional decision-making, is a nexus. So an area, a body, an assembly of where these cross-functional decisions can be made. It's not an all-powerful central bureaucracy which would paralyze everything. It is a agora, a forum, but it should have implementation power. So let's look at a very specific example of how this new VMO would actually work day to day. So what would be one of the responsibilities of this new VMO? Well, we saw earlier that one of the problems we've noted with the traditional PMO and XMO is the disconnect between strategy and execution, the disconnect between the portfolio and how it gets implemented. So that is one of the first areas of concern that a VMO, a newly created VMO, should turn its attention to. So what the VMO is going to enable is emergent strategy. What do we mean by emergent strategy? Well, remember when we talked about benefits at the upper right-hand corner, we said adaptation and the ability to innovate will be increased the more you go towards the upper right-hand quadrant where the VMO lives. Well, if we have unity of purpose and negotiation and open communication channels between all the players within the VMO, then they can adopt an emergent approach to strategy. All that means is that instead of the fire and forget once a year planning cycle where everything starts at once and all the budget is released at once, you keep some of your powder dry, as the expression goes. In other words, you hold back funds and you decide to prioritize slowly by working on fewer things at once. And you do this, and it gives you a chance to see where the market is going, where the competition is going. You don't start everything up at once. You give yourself room to maneuver. And everyone has agreed with this. As we know in the past, and in many organizations still today, there is a rush to get all the projects approved for the beginning of the fiscal year and have all this spending approved and documented and locked in. But it's basically, it's not meant for today's speed of change. It's early lock-in. So the VMO will, the conversations and the collaboration within the VMO will enable this far better than previous approaches. So what would this adaptive portfolio approach look like? We just have a few pointers here. So this adaptive portfolio, which is no longer, earmark all the money on day one of the fiscal year. So should cover a wide risk profile in terms of the initiatives that are chosen, co-created and prioritized, as we said, within the VMO. It should include long and short-term initiatives and use multiple criteria in terms of how these things get prioritized on an emergent ongoing basis. Cost of delay, CD3, the risk of doing and not doing, available skills, capability to deliver, and obviously the cost versus the benefits, which is included in cost of delay, basically. Now, how do we go about this, changing our ways of doing so that we can do this at the ground level, where the rubber meets the road, where the projects get executed upon? So here's an example of 5 projects running simultaneously. If it's a small organization, these are people, Anton and Mario and Juan and so on. You'll see that each of them has been assigned partially by his or her function to work on one of these projects. So let's say M is a business analyst. Well, M's boss, the head of the business analysis function in her organization, basically her role all historically has been to maximize the utilization of people. Right? So she'll promise 20% of M to one project and 30% of M to another, and so on, until the utilization has been achieved. We know now that pursuing utilization is a function, a consequence of silos, and it is completely suboptimal. Why? Very simple. The red and the green here, let's say this is, how value across all these projects is delivered. If everyone is on 5 projects, what you actually spend most of your time doing in each team is waiting for people, right? Waiting for people to get off the previous, oh, gee, Jim is on project 3 today and we need him all of a sudden, but no, he can't make back until Wednesday. So you end up waiting for people a lot. You'll see where I'm going with this in a minute. Now, if we could just think and allocate these same people, but to fewer projects at once, but give more allocation to each project, there will be a definite change in this. There's studies to back this up. It's simple math. If there's 2 teams or 2 people working on each project, you're going to spend a lot less time waiting. And I can even illustrate, if you go again, click, now you should see it, just the 2 red and green horizontal bars. If we go to the next slide, basically, this illustrates how much red waiting time is in scenario 1 and how much green work time is regained in scenario 2, without touching a single practice, without changing anything, without even introducing Agile. Just reducing wait time is a huge win. And there's the problem. Who today in an organization has the necessary authority to completely revamp people's assignments? The PMO doesn't. The PMO can't do it. An existing PMO cannot say, okay, I want Jim to be assigned full-time to this and full-time to that. The PMO is basically putting project managers in place and most of the time trying to get the team together. But it's the functional managers, the functional silos, who are operating on a basis of full utilization of their resources, who are creating this multiple assignments. And sometimes they're from different LOBs. There could be people in data who are part of the enterprise architecture or the data function, who no one has any say over where they go. That's completely centralized within that function. So the conversation that would happen within a VMO would finally enable the types of decisions necessary to reduce multitasking of people. But it cannot happen in the current organizational models where we have the executive decisions on top and then everything is dumped down to the PMOs to execute, when the PMOs don't have the authority or the ability to assign people in a way that is conducive to so much green work time as opposed to the red. So how do we get to those first steps? Once again, it's conversations. It's create an experiment where you have dedicated folks much more, and even without changing practices. And another argument for that, a single individual's mind, when you're on 5 projects, if you look at this is from a study from even 2015. When you're on 5 projects, the working time available becomes very, very, only 20% of your day. The rest of the time is lost to context switching. So we lose an incredible amount of time and energy when we context switch as individuals. And if we look again at the capacity-driven approach and the ramp up and ramp down of individual projects, as opposed to having longer live teams to whom we bring the work, which would be a value management approach. You can see here that again, the white space in the product, or basically the approach where we have fewer people and fewer teams, more dedicated, you get rid of all that gray waiting time. So this is just one example of the types of conversations, the types of decisions that only the collaboration made possible by a PMO can actually make happen. So again, with the limited scope and time we have, just some sort of final recommendations before we move on to questions, basically. But as we saw, involve all levels of the organization and bring that collaboration and create that decision space. But you can't force people. So if there's any players, any stakeholders that are not willing at the beginning to join the conversation, work with the people, work with the parts of the organization, work with the organizational elements that are ready. Do what you can to move forward with the allies you can find. Don't wait until everyone's on board, because it'll never happen at once. So proceed by invitation, get the folks who really want to make a change, start making gains as a smaller team with them, and eventually small successes will attract the attention of other organizational players, and you will get more and more pieces of the organization willing to at least try this way of working together. And the PMO is a great place to start, because the skills and the diplomacy and the knowledge of all how the pieces of the organization fit together are already in the PMO. All that was lacking was the authority, right? And the authority cannot be taken. It has to be created and collaborated by moving on to a VMO. Obviously, foster transparency and trust. I mean, it seems obvious, but it's not something. Transparency and trust is not something that is necessarily present with all players in all organizations. How many times have we seen political infighting, empire building, fiefdoms, competing for headcount? If all these things are present and there's a sort of a toxic environment, it will be far harder to get to something resembling a VMO. I will not hide that from you. And acknowledge that this journey will take time, years, not months. It doesn't mean that you have to wait years to see your benefits increase, though. As soon as you begin working with at least portions of the organization, or as soon as you gain new stakeholders, new participants in this idea of a VMO, you will start to see benefits almost immediately. Small at first, small in scale, small in impact, as we saw. But as you advance along that benefits curve and you get more and more players, and at one point, there will be a point where the VMO attains sort of a minimum viable effectiveness, where the benefits will really start to go up. That part will take time. That part can take years, but the benefits will accrue. Small wins will accrue benefits almost from the outset. And that pretty much concludes. I just have one more thing. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm very present on LinkedIn and always answer fairly quickly. I'm more than pleased to answer questions, and wanted to share some of the resources that I consulted while creating this presentation. Interesting recent book, which is actually called From PMO to VMO by Sanjeev Augustine and 2 other authors. Interesting read. It's not quite my approach. It's very detailed for very specific context, but some great ideas in there. And kudos, congratulations just for the title. I mean, it's exactly what we need to be doing. And with that, we can open it up to questions, I guess, George and Achilles, right?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Daniel. And once again, I will just virtually try to clap my hands because at this moment, you had no presentation in front of you, no access to your camera, and no access to the presentation we're sharing. So I would say that there was a perfect work between you and George, trying to follow up what you're saying. I don't know if someone was not at the very beginning, maybe didn't notice that there was this kind of interaction between you, you and George. So thank you so much for keeping up. And
Great to hear. Thanks, George.
yeah, thanks, George. That was amazing, right? Really, thanks. And there's a huge takeaway today for the moving from a PMO to VMO, but a second side takeaway for risk management that we successfully applied right here as a team. So I would say there are a lot of things here to discuss today, right? Yeah. So sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Daniel. That was so interesting to hear. And we from the events team had the chance to have a more deep dive discussion with you while we were making the first discussions. And I think that we're talking about the essence of of the business. So moving to the value, because that's at the end of the day what we're looking for any kind of organization, right? So moving from the just a typical PMO to a VMO, I think that's something that more or less a lot of people working in this industry can relate to, right? So yeah, let's see if there's any kind of questions from our community here, any kind of questions, that any kind of clarifications, or anything that you want to share with us and discuss further. I think we have a couple of minutes more, so yeah, feel free if you want to write in the chat box, and we can address the question to Daniel. All right. Oh, thank you. There's a comment, Daniel. I'm just sharing with you. There's a comment from I cannot see the name. It's a guest, but thank you for your kind words. All right. All right. Okay. So yeah, I guess there's not a question to share with you. Once again, thank you very much, Daniel, for having this presentation and for accepting. Oh, sorry, we just had. There's a question from Mr. Svoronos. So, Daniel, the question is, how does a VMO takes decision in a practical format? And in the context of why traditional managers will be okay to transfer decision making?
Okay, so I'll rephrase the question. So, yeah, actually, you want to repeat it, Achilles? So I'm sure that.
Yeah. Actually, the question is, how does a VMO takes decision in a practical way, right? In a practical
Okay.
format.
Yeah,
So,
in
and
concrete terms, yeah.
yeah, Dionysus here is following up his question by saying, in the context of why traditional managers will be okay to transfer decision making. So I can understand where Dionysus is coming from, because you made the reference that moving authority to other levels, and I guess that Dionysus is also making here a point that why a traditional manager having a specific mindset, I guess, will be okay to transfer this decision making. And
Okay, that's
yeah,
that's a great question. It's something, we called our company Agile Leader Academy because we actually feel an enormous amount of empathy for managers in the 21st century. Having worked with them and trained and mentored and coached many managers and executives. So the key there is, and this is important, the Agile community has not done a good job, for example, of reassuring managers that they are going to continue to have a job. In fact, the Agile movement as a whole, if you look at it, has taken sort of like an anti-management stance to a certain extent. And I've been doing agility for 13 years, and I've never taken that stance. When I describe functional managers making decisions based on resource utilization, I'm not demonizing them. They are simply doing what they had been asked to do in a different time. Now, there is an incredible opportunity for modern managers in organizations facing all the constant crisis that we're in to become something different. Instead of being always fighting with other managers and firefighting and putting out fires and swapping one person for another and being beholden to resource utilization. What happens with a VMO, the VMO, because it's prioritizing differently, doing fewer things at once, ideally the organization stops using utilization as a metric and starts using value delivery as a metric. So the time it takes for a project to go from concept to cash, we should baseline that at the beginning and baseline it as we have these more fully fledged, longer live teams. The manager's role then becomes as sort of a coach, a mentor, someone who can encourage the development, someone who can keep up with recent developments in their specialty and bring that mentoring and bring that support to the people they report to. So a weak matrix, we would call it in traditional project management, a very weak matrix, but with a development support person who used to be the manager in terms of task assignment. And there is room for that, and we've been teaching leaders and managers from many organizations for many years now. What is the mindset shift required of them, and what is the mindset or the shift required of the organization? But there is a definite role for managers and leaders that they can play. That's for the second part of the question. The first part of the question is, how does the PMO arrive at these decisions practically? And that is very simply by talking, collaborating, working it out. So the actual day-to-day details of how they organize their meetings or how they allocate, how they decide how to ratify decisions and so on. It could look like the way steering committees are run today, like the way executive committees are run today. It could also look different. Every organization will be a little bit different. What is important is to ensure that nothing gets decided outside of the VMO space that would affect the delivery of value. So, for example, if security wants to implement a whole new series of code tests, automated code tests, for example, to take a software example, that needs to go through the VMO. If data are redefining what constitutes a client in the databases, that the VMO needs to know this. There can no longer be each one of these functions changing the rules of their part of the game unilaterally and surprising everyone who is currently delivering on projects. How many times in my career did I see we would get to production, almost go into production with something, and oh, wait a minute, you have to fill in form F-173 since last week. What? No one told us, and who died and made you the boss of what gets filled out? Right? The conversations need to go through the VMO. The format, the details doesn't really matter, as long as the mindset and the attitude of those participating in the VMO is that no unilateral decisions of a single function can be allowed to slow down the delivery of value and the achievement of benefits. And it's a great way to also reduce redundant bureaucracy, right? Because there may be certainly, I'm sure you folks have seen, you're asked to fill out forms for one thing and forms for another, and the project has to go through this, and that, and an audit and compliance, and so many questions are redundant. So many processes can be redundant. The VMO again can have a centralized place to look at, well, where are all the compliance parts? Where are all the risk management parts? And how can we still achieve good risk management, still remain within industry regulation and compliance, but cut out anything that gets asked twice. Cut out the fact that, I've worked with auditors, for example, and auditors are on your side in an organization if you work with them. I've never seen an auditor ask for, well, did you do specifically this in form F7513? If it's there, sometimes they'll ask for it, but the auditor's interest is, Did you follow a process? Do you have a process, etc.? Bringing them into the conversation also helped to simplify. So team players and pieces of the organization that you never would have necessarily thought of approaching need to be brought into that conversation. Sort of a long-winded answer there.
Yeah, no worries. That makes sense. So we have 2 more questions here. So first question is from Mr. Kasapis Marios. So what Marios asks is, how mature do you think are the vast majority of the companies having PMOs to make the step for VMO transforming? Do you think that the majority is ready to make this step, to understand the value
I
of
would
the step?
say, yeah, from my personal insights and from conversations and from speaking with the authors of the book and other at conferences and so on, I would say that well, large organizations, maybe 5 to 10% are probably already starting to think this way and have made the first steps. So it's like a if you were to look at the graph there, you would have we're at the early adopter stage, right? We haven't reached we haven't started going up to the majority by any means. We're just at the beginning of the climb of the roller coaster. That's my sense. I don't have statistics on it, and if you do a search on how many companies have implemented VMOs, Google's answer is going to be kind of disappointing. There's not much. There's not much. So I definitely say early adopter stage.
Yeah, definitely. So the last question is from Mr. Markopoulos, George. So what Mr. Markopoulos says is, are there any measurable KPIs for such an office? And if so, can you please mention some?
Oh, absolutely. So I would, if I were to set up a VMO and I had full authority to put out the KPIs, I would immediately put one around basically a flow time. So how long does it, or time? Well, flow is one aspect of time. I call it time to value. So benchmark your projects, benchmark your initiatives now, and benchmark them in terms of how long it takes from the minute something is launched until it is there is a version of it in front of clients. What is the full lead time? So these are very sort of lean metrics. Another metric I would measure is how many in the portfolio, how many things are number one. Ideally, there should only be number one. Anything else is number two or number three. So what is your what does your I guess your backlog of look like in the portfolio? I've seen organizations have so many number ones that they invented number zeros to show that it was higher priority, but they were still doing it all at once. I left that engagement, but I'm sure they were about to invent priority -1. So if you count the number of initiatives stopped, I think the number of initiatives stopped or paused is also a very good measure. Because in a portfolio of 120 initiatives, for example, you really should be stopping about 90 of them if you want to get anywhere, right? A third metric I would probably look at team satisfaction. And that is very important because not just because we want to have happy, smiley faces and kumbaya. Team satisfaction is a reflection of how effective the people doing the actual work feel, and you want that to be going up, and you want that to go up for a simple reason: is that happier teams are going to do better work, they're going to do it faster, and they're going to do it with better quality. And you can capture all those things, right? The faster is the time to value, the better quality. You can capture also, if depending on your industry, what do defect reports look like? How do you find out about poor quality? Is it from the customer? Okay, well, have customer calls gone down since you've started this approach? Have customer complaints gone down? And these are obviously lagging indicators. Team happiness is a leading indicator, and reduce customer complaints, increase sales, or a lagging indicator. You find out only after it's hit the market.
All right. Okay. All right, Daniel. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for this great presentation and your insights. And thanks everybody for being here today. And we have a series of events doing, at the moment, and we'll be more than happy to see you there. Tomorrow, as Peter already mentioned in the chat box, we have the new initiative of the Navigate Project Management Essentials. We'll be happy to see you there. And of course, we have our monthly webinars, our collaboration with the Chapter Exchange event, and our podcasts. So keep in touch with us for all these great initiatives and events, and more than happy to see you again here soon. Goodbye. Have a nice evening.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.